How to stay still? That's the question. I think I've got a mic for you guys. I think it's charged. Don't mind my nails. They look absolutely disgusting. So, I'm coming on today because I'm currently reading Patriarchy Blues. And I thought this was a very timely read. Something that's really been intriguing for me is heteronormatives, within our society and how we interact with one another. I was watching The Hunting Wives on Netflix, and there was a scene in there, a very explicit scene of intimacy and intercourse between a man and a woman, and it was something I'd just never seen before. And there was this bit of normalization. Um, of this behavior, and I don't really care to go into it because it was a very explicit scene, but it started to make me question, some of, I won't say it comes from feminists. I don't think that this is their ideology and what it is they argue, but I do think, or I have heard rather, some women questioning whether or not men actually like women. And so you start to ask questions like, well, do men really like women? Are men intrigued by women? Do men like to just kind of be in the same space as women anymore? Right? We get online, and obviously we can make these kind of like generalizations, and I think much of it is economics. And the reason why I say that is because so much of manhood is really definitive upon economics and whether or not certain men are able to have access to capital and things like that. And I think that in that, depending on where we are within the economy, there's absolutely going to be an influx in romance, right? We were really living in a time where I think if you were paying attention, you could obviously see that the haves and the have nots, right? It was a really big gap growing between people. But I think most importantly, you could really start to see all of the unfairness and injustice that is really prevalent within the Black community. And it's not anything that's historic, right? I think if you're really paying attention right now, it was very loud and it was very blatant. I'm at this part where I'll actually read a little bit from this book, and this is something that really struck me because this is also something I've been thinking about. He says here, and I'll kind of be touching on this very briefly in this video today. Um, Hang on, guys. Okay, so this is he's referencing being at the funeral and witnessing the death, or the burial of his grandmother, and he says here, those in the room who knew the lyrics sang along to the song, which reflected a person who is constantly down, distraught, and suffering, but ultimately will not complain because Jesus is by their side. He says here that those born into pain, forced to stumble through a life of struggle, and then broken by the exhaustion of unfairness, all while claiming Jesus will make a way. He says here that he, referring to Jesus, was there as my grandmother lay, weeks in hospice. He was there in the fields of cotton as my great grandmother, toiled, and in the town square as my great grandfather was strung from a lamppost. He just didn't do anything about it. And it really struck me when I first read these words, right? As he's referring to Jesus, because it's like, wow, you know, talk about the unfairness, talk about the injustice. And I think for those of us who really want to refrain from the work of deconstruction, one, let me say this, right? Because I think a lot of people today, I wouldn't call them Black radicals, but I think for people who are kind of more on the forefront, they come out and they say things like, y'all need to deconstruct your faith, right? And they're very radical in this, right? And they don't really take into consideration the intimacies and the intricacies of that. And I think the reason why you talk about the work of deconstruction, and I think you need to do it with the level of sensitivity, is because there in the work of deconstruction, right? I actually think, you guys, I need to get some storage on my iPhone. But anyway, I was saying with the work of deconstruction, it actually requires safety. I think for so many of us, we rely on faith because we don't have communities, right? I don't think people realize that within the Black community, there has been many different institutions, many narratives, right? From gender wars to Christianity, so many things that have really kept us divided. Fear, stereotypes, painful experiences, right? A lack of justice and rectification, resolution, right? In regards to the injustice, in regards to the pain that we've experienced at the hands of familial relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, right? You really have this bevy of like betrayals, and there really is no one to support you in that, right? And so there's a lot of division within our community, and much of it, yes, is manufactured and it is based on living in a white supremacist society and the institutions at hand, but there is no justice, right? And so it's like when you start talking about doing the work of deconstruction, I think you need to do it with a level of sensitivity and awareness for what you're really, what you're really demanding of black people. You know what I mean? Many of us don't have friends. We don't have friends. We don't have partners. Many of us are living alone. Many of us are, stuck in situations that are completely unfair, right? It's easy to talk about resources that are available. It's easy to talk about this age of information technology and all these different things. But do you know how hard it is to do anything when it's just you? Like when you don't have any friends, when you don't have a partner, when you don't have anybody who is your safety net, you don't get to become the person that you were created to be, right? And so I think for many Christians who on the opposite side of that, right, you see people who kind of are really heavy, right, in regards to Christianity, and they ride on it, right? These women content creators, right? They're showing their beautiful homes and their husbands, and they're like, I'm a Proverbs 31 woman. These women are light skinned. Right? These women are light skinned. And what I found is, colorism plays a huge role in whether or not people are going to ride for Jesus, right? Because by default, life is a lot more fair to them, right? They're not suffering from the injustices of other people who are not given those privileges within society. So when you talk to them, right, it's easy for them to say, you need to just believe in Jesus. You need to just pray. You need to thug it out because they've never suffered that same loss, right? By default, we see lighter skinned persons, right? Colorism plays such a huge role. We see lighter skinned persons and we automatically we protect them, right? We see lighter skinned women and we think they deserve protection. She's fragile, she's delicate, she's worthy of safety. We see other women of another hair texture, of another skin complexion, and we say she's difficult, she's masculine, she's this insert derogatory term is demanding, right? But we got to protect this one. She's worthy of protection. So and even with lighter skinned men, right? It's he's soft. He's safe, right? He gets it. Black man, he's this insert derogatory term, right? He's aggressive. He's toxic. You know what I mean? And so when you don't suffer those injustices, it's easy for you to overlook the experiences that we're having. And I think that's also what I'm saying in regards to the division that we have within our community and why, although we're here all at the bottom, right? We're all kind of figuring out like, that Spider-Man meme where it's like three different Spider-Mans and they're all like pointing to one another. That's what it's giving right now within the black community because it's like nobody knows, right? We're all having different experiences. We're all having different realities, and we're failing to validate the realities of other people, right? On a good day, you might be riding for Jesus. And for some people, you start talking about Christianity, and like I said, these content creators and people who kind of push this narrative, it's like if life has always been good to you, right? And I don't want to, I'm not here to say that people don't have differences, and I don't want to further, agitate the idea that as black people, we're not in this together and that, persons, of a lighter complexion don't have any struggles. That's not what I'm saying. We all have struggles. Life is hard. And by default, it's always going to be harder for black people. But at the same time, at the same time, you know, we do have to reckon with that. And I think for a lot of people who don't reckon with that, they just don't want to see the truth. And I think if you don't want to see the truth of it, that you can't be out here, pushing certain narratives and you can't be out here so defensive in regards to an institution that is actively and historically has oppressed your people. And so I think for many people who do benefit from society, it's easy for them to kind of isolate themselves within religious institutions because it's comforting and you don't have to look at the oppression of other people and you can say, well, it's their choices, it's this, it's that, or you can just turn a blind eye and live your soft life, but it's a very real thing. And so I think the work of deconstruction has to be done compassionately. When I was talking about heteronormatives, as I opened this live and I was talking about men and whether or not men like women, I do still think it's economics. I do still think it plays a huge role. Like I said, if a person's economic state is the definitive justification, right, or the definitive affirmation of their existence, and you know we're down bad right now, then I just think by default people are not going to be as romantic I don't think that people are going to be as willing to partner, right? Everybody knows when the summertime hits, it's winter where I am. Everybody knows when the summertime's hit, you want to partner, you want to dance, you want to go out, you want to date. It's just a different time. So obviously winter plays a huge role, but I also think economics does as well. When the economy is doing well, people are shopping, people are conversing amongst one another. And so I don't necessarily think that men dislike women. I just think depending on where you are, if you find yourself constantly hearing how you ain't this, you ain't that, I think by default anybody is going to kind of be a little agitated, by that. And I think it's the same for women, right? You see this, I'm not on TikTok, but when I look on my YouTube main page, there's a lot of people who are kind of talking about, the ways in which black women can't be average and the ways in which black women have to be the baddest, right? I've always said this, as a black woman, it's hard, right, in dating. It just always has been, but it's hard in dating in the sense of like it's hard for black women in dating because you have to constantly navigate these stereotypes, right? For black women, you have to be the nastiest, the baddest, the most, you know what I mean? You gotta be that, you gotta be all the things for the guys to get to be looking at you. And for me as a young woman, obviously growing up, trying to figure out who I am, right? Starting to partake in certain enhancements, you know what I mean? Starting to do the extensions and different things. I absolutely was attracted to these type of guys, but it's hard, right? Because it's like it's something that you can't sustain. And so here we are economically, and black women can't sustain these beauty standards, right? We can't sustain the wigs and well, some people can. And obviously they're not having these problems, but for the women who can't, yeah, it's a little rough. It's a little lonely right now. And I don't want to end this with a cliche, like we just gotta love yourself and but just by default, yeah. And so it's whatever is hot on the market. And I think that's really what's defining things. Do I want to toy with the idea that most men are homosexual? Not really. It's not something I really care to introduce in my space. Like I said, as far as if I want to sit and toy with the idea and think like, okay, are most men? I don't know. I don't necessarily feel like I get that vibe overwhelmingly from men. I think I don't really know where that comes from. I don't know if that's just more so like, is that just one of those things where people just say stuff to just kind of throw dirt? Like, you know what I mean? Like, is there really any justification behind that? I don't really know. He kind of spoke about this and how he put he and him in his bio. Me personally, because I don't really have an understanding of like certain feminist works and frameworks and things like that. I personally didn't I don't really partake in it because I just don't understand it. You know what I mean? I don't know anything about it. It's not something I've been introduced to. And I think most black people are pretty conservative. I actually do. It's funny. I feel like when it comes to anything that America is trying to do in terms of progress, they always want to put it on the shoulders of black people. You know what I mean? It's like we got to be the ones repping for, the immigrants and the LG. Like we always got you put that on us. But I actually think most black people are conservative. I was listening. I actually wasn't listening to it because I turned it off because I was like, this is garbage. There was this podcaster on Wesley. He's a podcaster for the New York Times. He talks about film and movies, and he was podcasting with some guy. He was talking, those millionaire mindset type of. I can't. I really can't. I can Anytime I see a black man in a suit on a flyer on a podcast cover talking about millionaire mindset, I'm absolutely turning it off. I cannot. I just can't. I can't. I'm sorry, but I just can't. Really? No, seriously, I can't. So it was one of those. And as I was listening, sorry, I gotta go. But the title of the podcast was really intriguing. And he basically was just asking the question whether or not immigrants were replacing black people. And I didn't really get to get into it because he started to talk about how if black people would be more conservative than X, Y, and Z. And I said, okay, yep. And this is where we go because to humanize black people is to realize that when we were freed from bondage, okay, we absolutely, and when I use the word, when I say we assimilated into society, what I'm saying is that we were always capable of civility, okay, we were always capable of being upstanding and standard citizens, right? We have been in America for quite some time, so we are very much accustomed to the ways of American, right? America traditions and our mannerisms and things like that. And so I say all that to say Black people are conservative in the sense that America is fundamentally conservative, right? Our Western society is fundamentally conservative, perverted, but conservative, right? Nonetheless. And so when people try to say things like, oh, well, Black people are this and that, it's like, it's not true. Any person who's been with, if you're Black, you know what I mean? You have Black family, like most Black people are actually pretty conservative. Like, I think, again, any other ideology is based on people who don't know Black people who, yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't even have to go further into that. So this was great. I gotta go, but hope you guys got something from this. I think all in all, um, stay grounded, stay grounded, stay rooted. I know we're living in a day and age where, everybody's coming on doing this commentary, everyone's coming on in this public sphere. And a lot of people are kind of raving about how it's incredibly marketable to be a commentator today. I tell people all the time, I was here before the trend. I was here before, I'll be here long after the trend. I would do this if you guys never showed up just because I love it, and I've been doing it for a very long time, right? I don't make any money from this. And I would be here even if, it really doesn't matter, and so I say all that to say, um, it's a wave, and it's a wave, and it's dangerous when you start introducing ideas that reduce people and that further dehumanize African Americans, even if you dress it up in scholarly and academic language, right? So you have to kind of be careful and put your feet on the ground. Like, do you really think that about Black people? Do you really think that about Black men and Black women? Now I'll end this by saying I do wish that Black men would be more curious about the interior lives of Black women, and I do wish that Black men would be more curious about just Black women in general, and all the things. I don't think that they are. I don't think that they are. And I do think, even this most recent situation with Sharon Moore and so forth, I was listening to FD. He said something that I just was like, this is absolutely it, right? He spoke about how him and Shador Sanders, typically become the revolutionaries, right? And we have to rally behind them when we say injustice. This is another Black man y'all trying to keep down. Y'all did the same thing with Diddy. But it's like, no, this is not a revolutionary just because they experience racism. And so he made that point, and I'm in agreement with that. And so, yeah, I don't know. I just think if we really want to, I'm actually not going to end this by, talking about community and unification because I'm just not going to go there. I'm not going to go there. But I will say, I do wish that Black men were more curious about the lives of Black women. I think far too often they, those who are in this space who may be, academically astute or academically impressive or whatever, they lean so far into the feminist rhetoric that it reduces Black women's experience. And I think it kind of like conceptualizes our experience in a way that is very fabricated, like we're here, we're real, we're on the ground. I still think to this day, I think most Black people are actually having the same experience in terms of, well, yeah, actually, that's not true. That I've learned that is actually not true. But I do think depending on who you are and where you are, um, we can have points of relation. And so I'm gonna end there because I don't want my plot to be lost. I don't know what I'm gonna call this. Thank you guys so much for joining. Hopefully I can read these comments afterwards. Let's see. Where do you think all this is coming from? Oh, as far as like the narratives, they are curious about us. They just try to control our image and to control our options. Are you saying like dating? I'm more so saying curious about, you know, how we grow up, right? I think that for many Black women, we're curious about little Black boys in the sense that, we are aware of the injustice. We are aware of the predation, right? Predation. We are aware of what it is that they go through, right? Even this whole thing, right? Sharon Moore, like you have, OJ Simpson, right? You have Black women who are always on the front lines defending Black men and who have this awareness of their injustice and awareness of their experiences. Even myself, I'm sitting here reading Patriarchy Blues, right? Like, Black men don't have that same curiosity is what I'm saying, right? I don't typically meet guys who are like, how did you grow up? Or, and it's not necessarily about like trauma bonding or, it's more so just that level of curiosity that I just don't think that Black men have about Black women, right? I don't think that they are even aware of, the predation that the predatory, behaviors around Black girls and what it's like for so many of us Black women as little Black girls. They're not curious about our experiences. They're not curious about what we endure, right? Everyone talked about the whole thing about eating the bear, and that's just not true. And listen, I know you guys are going to disagree, but it's just the truth. Now if you want to say, if you want to make the claim that, hey, you got to meet a man of depth, then maybe maybe. But I mean, even still, what are we talking about? Are we talking about unicorns here? What are we talking about? I'm talking about practicality, but on average, right? And then I think you have to reckon with the fact that maybe they aren't curious about themselves. I don't know. But collectively, you have like I'm reading this book as well. It's called Why Beautiful Women Have Daughters. And it's a really, really good book. It's more so talking about philosophy. It talks about why are certain people famous and things like that. And I'm gonna go because I said this, I was gonna go prior, but I'm still here. And it's just a book about philosophy and something that I just want to share with you guys. You know, he talked about generalizations and how we don't like them, right? A lot of times it's stereotypical, but by and large, it's actually pretty true, you know? And so, yeah, you know, you ever hear a stereotype and you're like, but then it's like, it is true though. You know, and here's the thing. You talk about black culture, right? Because stereotypes are very harmful. Sometimes people fall into stereotypes and they start to enact these stereotypes because they've just heard it. And again, when you're existing in a paradigm, you hear something repetitiously, you start to enact that behavior. And that's really most people. I mean, it's not really until you start to program your mind, okay, and get and formulate your own ideas and unlearn and relearn things that you can really start to individuate yourself. You know what I mean? And become your own person and say, no, that I'm not standing with that. That doesn't work for me. You know what I mean? But until then, yeah, most of y'all, you're gonna fall in line with those stereotypes, and that's how you're gonna act. So no, black men are not curious about black women in that way. They're not curious about our hardships within the black community and what it is that we go through. And I don't say this from anger. I say this from awareness. Do better, and maybe we all can. You know, I'm not gonna say. I'm gonna go. I'm gonna go. I'm just gonna go. Bye, y'all.